I live by myself in a one-bedroom apartment. My building has 4 floors and I'm on the top. I've enjoyed living here for the most part, but I almost moved out after something that happened a while ago. It's now been 4 months since the incident occurred. I had been living there long enough to know several of my neighbors and what they looked like. I would occasionally see them coming and going as I did. I wasn't really friends with any of them though. Well, one night, like any other, I went to bed at the time I usually did, about 10 o'clock. I remember waking up in the middle of the night though, and immediately hearing this noise. It sounded like my apartment door was being unlocked. The next thing that I knew, my front door opened up. When I heard this, I was suddenly wide awake, and I got out of my bed and stood up. But I didn't really hear anything else now. I was wondering what exactly was going on. After like a minute, I walked to my doorway, which was closed. Then I slowly opened up the door. Every light was off in my apartment, so I really couldn't see much of anything. About the only light came from my window, which was partly open, and there were some lights from outside. So I looked out into the rest of my apartment, and after several moments, I still didn't hear or see anything. There was a light switch that I could just barely reach. I felt around on the wall and then turned the light on. As soon as it came on, I saw that there was this random woman standing in the middle of my living room. It was one of the craziest things I've ever seen. But then I realized that this wasn't some random woman. She was one of my neighbors. As soon as I noticed her, she moved and started running away towards the front door. Then she left my apartment and was gone. I really had no idea what was happening, but I knew that the woman was not supposed to be in my place, so I called the cops. I waited around until they got there. The woman was my neighbor from down the hallway, and I had never even spoken to her, but I had seen her a few times here and there. After the police got there, I told them that my neighbor had somehow broken into my place. I gave them all the details of what happened. They went over to my neighbor's and knocked on her door. I remember that she acted like she had been asleep and had no clue what was going on. She completely denied the entire thing. I was afraid that it was going to just be my word against hers, but luckily, my apartment building had pretty good security cameras. After looking at them, it was clear that she had entered my place. Somehow, she was able to pick the lock. I honestly have no clue, but I pressed charges against her, and she was evicted shortly after. My apartment building also had to replace the locks. I really don't know why she wanted to get into my place. I'm really glad that I woke up when I did though. For a little bit of background to this story, I'm a female, and this happened when I was 12. I lived in this quiet residential neighborhood with my parents, and there was this park at the end of the street that we lived on. During the summers, almost every morning, I would walk my dog down to the park. My dog's name was Max, and he had lots of energy. It seemed like he could run for hours without getting tired. So luckily for me, the park that we went to was usually empty, and I would always let him run around for a while. Well, one morning, we went for our walk like usual. The street was quiet, and Max and I arrived at the park at the usual time. I remember that as he was running around, I noticed an ice cream truck going down the street. As it drove by, it stopped just in front of where the road turned. I could sort of see it between some trees. It seemed like an odd place for the ice cream truck to stop. I just kept my eye on it, and the truck sat there for a little while. I couldn't really tell who was driving, but it didn't stop and open up to sell ice cream. After that, I decided to stop looking at it, and I focused my attention back on Max. A while later though, I noticed that the truck was still there. I stayed at the park for maybe 30 minutes, and then finally went to leave. When I did, I noticed then that the truck was now gone. I would have had to walk sort of in front of it to go home. So the next day, I went back to the park at around the same time. Once again, it was just me and Max there. This time, I noticed the ice cream truck again. It didn't stop though, but drove by very slowly. After that, I didn't see it for the rest of the day. But the following day after that, I saw it again. I was at the park again with Max, just like usual. This time, I saw the truck approaching, and then it parked in the same spot as before. After the truck parked, for a while, nothing happened. Then I actually noticed a guy getting out. But what happened next was very strange. He walked down the street a little, and then appeared to go in a neighbor's yard. After that, he went completely out of my sight. But several minutes later, I noticed the man again. He was entering the park that I was in from the opposite side. This would have been the complete other side from the one that his truck was parked on. When I saw the man, he was walking straight for me. After getting within maybe 20 feet, he said hi to me. I was sitting on a park bench, and I had Max on a leash. The guy started asking me questions about Max and stuff. He was pretty nice, but then the guy asked me if I needed a ride home, which seemed strange. Of course, I said no to him. He stayed there and continued talking to me. Then the man said that he too had a dog and wanted to know if I wanted to see it. I said no thanks, wondering how that would even be possible. Then I got up and said that I had to be getting home. We started to walk away from the man. I would have had to go by his ice cream truck, and he started to walk after me. I didn't look behind me, but I could sense him walking. At one point, about halfway out of the park, Max turned and started barking at the guy. I didn't look. We just kept going. Soon, we made it back out into the street. Then I heard the guy cross over. I glanced back and saw him getting into his ice cream truck. Max and I jogged the rest of the way back home, and we were able to make it. Moments after arriving in the front yard, I saw the ice cream truck approaching down the street. I ran and I hid behind my parents' car in the driveway. The ice cream truck drove by extremely slow, but I was confident that the man couldn't see me. Then I went inside. After that, I took a break from walking Max in the morning. Instead, we just let him run around our backyard for exercise. Eventually, though, I did go back, and I never saw that man again, luckily, or his ice cream truck.
This story happened 5 years ago. I have my own house and live sort of out there. I don't get many people at my front door. So one day as I was having some morning coffee, I heard the sound of my doorbell ring. I was slightly surprised by this, so I walked over and looked out the window. It looked to be one of those door-to-door salesmen or something like that. The guy wore a jacket and had a sort of clipboard with a pen in his hand. As I looked out the window, he noticed me and gave a friendly wave. I decided to go to the door and answer it, and just tell him that whatever he was selling, I was not interested in. I opened the door and greeted him. He said hi and complimented me on my house. I said thanks, but anything he was offering, I really wasn't interested in. Then I saw 3 men appear out of the side of the house that I couldn't see from my angle. They all started running towards me, and I tried to slam the door shut, but the salesman guy stuck himself in the way, and before I knew it, there were 4 guys in my house with me. One of them grabbed me by the arms, and another one told me that they needed some things, and I was going to wait in my room until they got it. They then stated that if I had enough valuables for them, they wouldn't hurt me. Now, I had a few valuable things in my house, but I didn't know what they wanted, and the thought of them hurting me made me want to get away. One of the men began to lead me down the hallway, and as he did, he gripped onto my right arm. The other men started to walk around the house in all different directions. I had an idea, and I knew it was a big risk, but I guess I just had a rush of adrenaline in the moment. As soon as we were passing by the bathroom in the hallway, I tugged away as fast as I could and broke free from the man's grip. I then got into the bathroom and slammed the door shut and locked it as quick as I could. The man was really close to getting in, but I think he was a little caught off guard by my actions. I knew he was going to try to break the door down, and I heard him try as soon as he realized the door was locked. The guy was pretty big, so I didn't doubt that he would be able to knock the door down before long. So I quickly opened up the bathroom window as fast as I could. It took me a little while, probably about 30 seconds, but once I did, I was able to just barely squeeze out the window and get outside. Once I was outside, I began to run as fast as I could towards the neighbor's house. It took me a while to get there, and I'm pretty sure one of the men went out of the house to chase me, because I heard running in the backyard, but I sure didn't stop to look. I finally got to the front door of one of my neighbors and knocked on it as loud as I could and fast. I looked around but didn't see anybody coming after me at the moment. They opened the door after a little while, and I told them what was going on. My neighbor Margaret let me stay inside her house, and I called the police. They arrived a short time later, but by then, all the men were gone. When I got back to my house, it was a huge mess. They hadn't really stolen anything, but more so vandalized the place, breaking lots of things and just overall causing a huge mess. I had to use my insurance, but at the end of the day, I was just happy to be all right. I've been on the deep web many times before, but the creepiest thing that ever happened to me took place about a year ago. One night, I was especially bored, and I was in a chat room where a user sent me a link to a game. He said it was a sort of code-breaking game, and I had heard about some of those in the past, and I wanted to know what they were like. When I got the link, I clicked on it, and it led me to an all-black screen with yellow letters that said "Begin." I clicked it, and nothing happened for quite some time. There was just text on the screen that said "Wait." It took a few minutes, but finally the game started. Things started out relatively normal. There was a few sort of codes that were easy to figure out, and suddenly the game seemed to stop. The screen just went black, and it was a little strange, but I moved on at that point. I got off my computer and went to do other stuff. 2 days went by, and I got a random letter in the mail. I opened it up to see a blank white piece of paper folded up. When I unfolded it, it revealed a web address. I went on my browser that I used to access the deep web, and I typed in the address. I realized that it seemed to be a continuation of the game that I had been playing. It had a button on it which I clicked. Then it started playing a video. It was a surveillance video of some kind. The more I watched it, the more I could tell it was a Walmart. The video followed someone walking into the store eventually. It was security camera footage, so the quality wasn't the greatest, but after about 5 seconds, I realized the person it was showing was myself. I had been to the store the day before, and the video followed me throughout the store, and even showed me checking out and leaving. It then changed to a gas station security camera, a gas station that I had also been to the day before. It showed me getting gas and once again leaving. The video then ended, and after that the web page went all black. Text then appeared on the screen saying, "Level 2, and then an option to begin. I didn't have any interest in playing this game any longer, and I exited out of my web browser. I was pretty creeped out, but I knew the dangers of the deep web, and that these sort of things could be done, so after that I decided to stay away from it for a while. I do sometimes wonder, though, what level 2 was. When I got my first job after graduating college, I didn't have much money, and I had to go move to a new city, so I needed a roommate for a while. I was desperate, so I put an ad out that I needed a roommate, and I basically took the first guy to respond and got a place with him. His name was Michael, and when we met, he seemed like a pretty normal guy. He was roughly my age and was nice, but a bit quiet, and overall I didn't think it would be a problem living with him. The apartment that we had was on the 4th floor of a 6-story building. It had 2 bedrooms, one at each end of the hallway. It also had a bathroom, kitchen, and a living room that we shared. Over the first few weeks, I was mostly busy with work and didn't really talk to Michael much or see him. He would mostly just be in his room with the door shut, and I didn't have a problem with that. I did occasionally try to have conversations with him if I saw him out of his room, but he seemed like a pretty private guy and never really talked much about himself. Still, this didn't really bother me much, because as long as he paid his half of the rent and didn't mess up the place, I had no reason to complain. That's why on one night, about a month into living there, I woke up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. I looked around and was really surprised to see Michael standing in the doorway of my bedroom. He seemed to be looking at me. I said, "Michael?" He stood there for at least 10 seconds just looking at me before saying that he wasn't sure if I was awake or not. He wanted to know if I had a pair of headphones that he could borrow. I told him I didn't, and then he walked away. I laid there really confused for a few minutes before finally falling back asleep. It really wasn't like him to do something like that. Overall, it was weird, but it was really nothing that strange. But just a few nights later, I woke up in the night again, but this time I saw Michael actually inside of my room. I watched him walk out of my room and back down the hall. I don't think he saw me at all, and I ended up just falling back asleep again. Then again, about a week later this time, I was not asleep yet, but I was laying in bed about to fall asleep, and I saw my door slowly start to open, and Michael just walk in without knocking or anything. He looked at me, but all my lights were out, and I don't think he could tell if I was awake or not. I asked him what he was doing in my room, and he seemed really startled to see me awake. He paused for a few seconds, and then walked to my hamper, which had a bunch of my clean clothes that I had just washed in it. He said he thought I had taken some of his socks by accident, and he couldn't find them. I really wasn't buying that excuse, but I told him to go ahead and look at my clothes. He looked around for a while and then just left. The next day, I decided to confront Michael and ask him why he kept going in my bedroom in the middle of the night. When I did, he played dumb and said that he only went in there one time. I told him I had seen him in there before, but he completely denied it. That made me start to wonder if I had made a bad decision on being so quick with my choice of roommate. I just hoped that after I talked to him, he would stop going in my room. And it seemed to work because I didn't wake up or see any evidence of him being in my room for probably about a month, which was nice. But then one night, I once again awoke, but this time saw Michael literally standing over me at the end of my bed. When I saw it, I jumped back. Michael looked very startled as well and immediately ran out of my room. This was the last straw for me, and I decided that the next day I was going to look into moving out of that apartment and getting locks for my door in the meantime. But the next morning when I woke up, Michael was gone and all of his things were gone from his room. I had never really been in his room before, but his door was wide open and there was nothing in it at all. The only contact I had for Michael was a phone number. I called him and then texted him, but I never got an answer. I looked him up online but couldn't find him anywhere on social media. He kept paying his rent every month the same as always until our lease ended. I never did end up seeing him again.
I live in a 2-story house with my husband. The house is pretty old, but has a decent-sized attic up top. We don't really use the attic other than for storage, which really comes in handy for keeping the rest of our house clean. Last fall, I was going up to the attic to get some documents. I hadn't been up there for quite some time. I opened the latch in the ceiling and pulled down the staircase which came down from the door in the ceiling all the way to the floor. I walked up, and when I got inside, I saw that some of the things in the attic seemed to be rearranged. We had quite a few boxes up there, as well as other junk, so that took up almost all the space in there, but I knew things weren't the way I had left them last time. It made me a little worried, but I thought maybe my husband had rearranged things up there for some reason. I knew this was likely the case, but as I was looking around in several of the boxes up there, I had a really uncomfortable feeling. The attic was actually kind of big, and I had to go all the way to the back side of it to find what I was looking for. I hurried up and got what I needed, then went back downstairs. I went straight to my husband and asked him if he had been in the attic recently. He casually said that he had been up there a couple of weeks ago. This made me feel a lot better, because I hadn't been up there in at least a few months. The next day, I went back up to the attic to put the documents back. Once I got up there, I went to the far end of the attic back to where the boxes where I kept them in were. I started to put them inside, and as I was doing this, I just barely heard my husband start to shout my name. I called out to him and asked what he wanted. He seemed to be frantically yelling my name. I turned and walked about 10 feet over to where I could see the entrance of the attic. I saw the door opening and my husband enter. He motioned to me to come over to him and was yelling at me. I ran over to him, but I was really confused. We both went back downstairs. He then got on the phone with police. I was shocked until my husband told me that after I had gone up into the attic, he said he entered the hallway to use the bathroom when he saw a man's arm reach down from the entrance of the attic. The arm then lifted up the staircase to the attic and closed the door. That's when my husband ran over and began calling my name. He said whoever did this was still in the attic. We left the house until the police arrived. They ended up finding a man who was hiding in the corner of the attic behind several boxes. They said he had likely been in there for a few days. It really gave me the creeps to know that I wasn't alone in there either time that I had been in the attic, and it wasn't my husband who had moved things around after all. I'm just really happy that my husband saw what was going on, or I don't know what would have happened to me. A couple of years ago, after graduating from college and living in an apartment for a couple of years, I finally bought my first house. It was sort of small but had 2 floors and a basement. I got a pretty good deal on it because it needed a little bit of work, but over the first few months, I got a lot of improvements done. Anyways, one day after work, I was going down to the basement to do some laundry. The basement was mainly unfinished, but I did have some extra furniture and a few boxes down there. As I was passing by the main room of the basement to the laundry room, I thought I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. I stopped in place and looked over. Then I leaned down to get a better look. When I could get a better angle, I saw that there was a man hiding underneath a table that I had sitting in the basement. I must have been frozen in shock, because it took me several seconds to believe that there was actually some random guy in my basement. The man made eye contact with me, and then he moved. He got up from underneath the table and ran into a nearby room. The next thing I knew, all of the lights went out and I couldn't see anything at all. I figured he messed with the fuse boxes down there and switched them off or something. I literally couldn't see anything at all. And unfortunately for me, I had left my phone upstairs charging and couldn't use anything as a flashlight. I was probably about 15 or 20 feet away from the stairs, and I wanted to get out of the basement as soon as I could. I started to slowly walk in what I thought was the direction of the stairs. It was very quiet down there. Then I heard noises of moving coming from a ways away, but I couldn't tell exactly where. I didn't know who this guy was in the basement with me, or how he got in my house, but I was terrified at him possibly being dangerous. I quietly moved a bit faster towards the stairs, and when I thought I would be getting to the steps, I tripped on something and fell down. When I did, I heard more movement. This time it sounded like the guy was closer to me. I decided to crawl to the stairs, and I constantly felt around for the steps. Soon I was able to find them, and I began crawling up the stairs on my hands and knees. At last, I felt myself reach the door to the upstairs. Then I began to stand up to open the handle. When I did, I felt my right ankle suddenly get grabbed. Whoever it was had grabbed my leg and pulled me back to the ground. Then we started to go back down the stairs. As this happened, I desperately kicked my legs around as fast as I could. I could feel the man grabbing at my legs and trying to get closer to me. I could feel the man grabbing at my legs, trying to pull me down. I was able to get one really good kick in, and it seemed to get him in the head. I felt his grip loosen, and I quickly kicked away and stood back up, then opened the door. I wasted no time in shutting the door behind me and running to grab my phone. Then I ran out the back door to the house and called the police. I didn't stop running until I was off of my property and in the street. The police said they would have someone there within a few minutes. I continued to move away from the house though, because I didn't want to take a chance on seeing the man again. I didn't even care if he left. When the police arrived, sure enough, the man was gone, and my front door was left open. I don't know how the man got in my house or what he was doing down there, but those were probably some of the scariest moments of my life that day. I was very careful to always lock my doors after that, and I only lived in that house for a few more months before moving. This story took place 2 summers ago. I was walking my dog Albert one night after work. It was something that I did almost every day. Usually I would walk Albert earlier, but I had been working late that day, so I went out just as the sun was setting at about 8:30 p.m. or so. I would walk around the neighborhood and into some other neighborhoods that were close by. It was a pretty nice area with a lot of houses, and normally I'd see a few other people out walking dogs and such, but at this time it was pretty empty. I went about 30 minutes out, but before turning back, I let Albert run around in the grass a little. As I did, I noticed something off in the distance. It was someone wearing a clown costume. The costume was really well done. He was wearing a whole clown outfit, and instead of a mask, appeared to have his whole face painted, and was also wearing a wig. It seemed really weird to me immediately, because it wasn't Halloween, and he didn't appear to be with anyone.
He just seemed to kind of be walking up and down the street. Unfortunately for me, I had to walk past him to get home. I waited there at the park for a few minutes to see if he would walk away first, but then Albert seemed to notice him and let out a few barks. Albert is a French bulldog, so he's pretty small and not very intimidating, but he still likes to bark at people a lot. As he did, I saw the clown stop walking and turn his head over to look at us. He then turned his head back and walked away. Once he was gone, I headed back with Albert. I didn't notice the clown at all anymore until about 10 minutes later. I heard the sound of someone walking behind me, not very close, maybe about 100 feet back or so. Immediately, I got a bad feeling that it was the clown. I didn't want to stop and look behind me, so I just kept walking until I got to the next street corner, and when I did, I casually looked behind me to see that it was in fact the clown that was walking behind me. I continued to walk home with the clown tailing a far ways back. The longer he followed me and the closer I got to home, the more nervous I became. For a few minutes, I didn't hear the clown at all, so I turned around and was relieved to not see anyone. But just a few minutes later, I heard the footsteps once again. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of the footsteps change to the sound of someone running. I looked behind me and saw the clown running directly at me and Albert with a huge, creepy grin on his face. At that point, I knew nothing else but to start running myself. I sprinted as fast as I could. Luckily, I'm in pretty good shape, and so is Albert. Even though his legs are pretty short, he was able to keep up with me as I sprinted down the street. I took a turn at the next block, and even though it wasn't the way home, I was trying to lose the clown. Then when I was at the end of that street, I turned again. At last, I stopped hearing the clown and looked behind me to see that he was finally gone. I walked a few more blocks and then went back to the way home. I was checking my surroundings constantly the entire way back. I was so glad to make it back safely without the clown following us, and decided I would try to avoid walking Albert at night from then on. I went to bed that night and slept great. But when I woke up the next morning, I opened the blinds to my bedroom window and noticed something. On my bedroom window, there was a balloon with the string taped to it. I got the chills when I saw it. The creepiest part is that I had slept with my windows cracked open all night, something that I often did during the summertime to get some fresh air in the house. I figured it had to be the clown that left the balloon, and it creeps me out thinking he was outside my window that night. But who he was or what he wanted, I still don't know. I used to work at a GameStop. The time that I worked there was for about 6 months, roughly 5 years ago. The GameStop was located on the end of a little strip mall in a pretty popular shopping area in town. The job was pretty good for the most part because I liked video games a lot and I knew a lot about them. Anyways, a few months into the job, when I had gotten the hang of everything, I started to work nights, which was the busier shift. I generally worked from sometime in the mid-afternoon until 9 p.m., which is when we closed. Things were busiest in the late afternoon, and then they would quiet down as we got into the night. One night, when things were pretty dead, I noticed a man come into the store and immediately go to the far corner and look at our PS4 used game section. He just kind of stood there though, not really seeming to be looking at anything in particular. He slowly paced a little and stayed in the store for roughly 10 minutes and then left. This wasn't anything to take note of, except for the fact that this happened every night for about a week straight. The man would come in at around the same time every night and stand by the PS4 section, but never buy anything. He usually had his back turned to me the entire time. However, he would occasionally look over at me. All I could get from this was that he always wore a jacket and hat, as well as sunglasses. I just got a little suspicious feeling, but then again, he never did anything wrong, so it was probably just me being over paranoid. Then one night, after work, I closed up the store and went to my car. When I arrived at my car, there was an envelope tucked into my driver's door. At first, I thought it was some kind of brochure, but when I got closer, I saw that it was a DVD in one of those little envelopes. It had no labeling on it of any kind. I didn't know what it was supposed to be, but being into technology, I took it home and put it in my computer to watch what was on it. I played it, and the first part was a man's voice speaking that I couldn't recognize. And the sentences that he was saying weren't making any kind of sense at all. This continued for several minutes. Then the video switched to a recording from a car. It appeared to be a video taken from the back of a car at another car driving. The video then zoomed in on the driver of the car, and that's when I nearly had a heart attack. I saw that it was me driving on the video. It showed me driving down the road, even making a few turns. Then the video cut out and went to another video of a car driving. This was also my car, except this time the video was taken from a car following me and on a different day. It showed me turn on several roads, and then onto my street and all the way into my apartment complex. Then it showed me get out of my car and walk inside. The video ended after that. I was really creeped out with what I had seen. I called a few of my friends and talked to them, hoping maybe it was some sort of a prank, but it wasn't. But back to the suspicious man that always came into GameStop and never bought anything. After seeing him on the night that I got the mysterious DVD, I never saw him come into the store again. That makes me think that the two were linked. But nothing else weird ever happened after that. I ended up giving the DVD to the police, and I moved a couple years ago. About 5 years ago, my best friend asked me to watch her dogs for her while she went out of town for vacation. She was going away for a week and had 3 dogs. I know this is bad, but I don't know exactly what kind of dogs they are. They're a mix of a few breeds and are kind of small, but I'm not really a dog expert. Anyways, I got all the instructions on when to feed them and when to let them outside, even what time they usually went on their walks. I was happy to take care of them because my friend had her own small house and I had 2 roommates, so it was nice to get away on my own for a bit. The first day and night went great with no problems at all. It was really easy because the dogs are always really well behaved and trained. The second night though, after I had taken the dogs out for the final time of the day and was about to go to bed, I was upstairs and heard the dogs start to bark like crazy from down in the kitchen. I went down to see what it was. The dogs usually always stayed in the kitchen, where their bowls were, and even though they were well trained, they had a divider put up between the living room at night just to be safe. When I got down there, I saw that the dogs were jumping up and down and going wild. I went over and looked out the back door, but didn't see anything outside. Then I realized that I hadn't locked the door, so I quickly locked it and then tried to calm down the dogs. They must have seen some sort of animal or something is what I was thinking, because they usually didn't bark so much. Finally, I was able to calm them down and they were quiet again. I went back upstairs and laid down to go to sleep. I fell asleep for a little while, but woke up again not much later to the sound of the dogs barking again. I went downstairs and saw them once again jumping up and down and barking. I looked around outside and still couldn't see anything. I watched the dogs, noticed that they weren't necessarily barking at the back door, but more so at the closet door that was inside and next to it. I got a bad feeling about this, but I decided to open the closet door. I walked closer and I knew it would be empty, but I just wanted to open it for peace of mind. I got to the handle, and just when I was about to grab it, I saw it start to turn on its own. This caused me to back up and immediately run upstairs. I got into the bedroom and locked the door behind me. I heard the sound of someone walking downstairs and the dogs start to go crazy once again. Then I heard footsteps start to come upstairs. At that point, I took out my phone and I called the police. I ran to the far corner of the room and talked to them. The footsteps came up the stairs, but I never heard anyone try to open the door to the room I was in. After the police let me know they would be on their way, I listened closely, but I didn't hear any more noises. I didn't dare move and I kept silent. It felt like forever that I was sitting there listening for any kind of noises, and I fully expected whoever was there to try to come in the room, but the entire time I waited there and I heard nothing. I knew the person had to be upstairs still, because if they went back downstairs it would likely set the dogs off again. Finally, I heard the sounds of police arriving coming from downstairs. They made their way into the house through the back door, and the dog started barking once again. The police went upstairs, and I unlocked the bedroom I was in for them. Then I left the house as they searched the rest of it. After they were done searching the house, they said they couldn't find anybody inside at all. I even went inside with them to search again, but there was nobody in there. I don't know whoever was there because I never saw them, but I really don't know how they left.
I used to live in this old apartment building. My name is Sabrina, and this took place about 5 years ago now. My place had 1 bedroom and 1.5 bathrooms. Overall, it was not the greatest, but I didn't mind it. I was on the 2nd floor, and there were lots of other people living in the building. But several months after I had started living there, I got a new next-door neighbor. His name was Arthur, and he was a creep from almost the very start. I know that the way he met me was strange enough. I left my apartment and was walking down the hallway. He came up behind me and tapped me on the shoulder, startling me. Then he introduced himself, and it was really awkward. He told me that he lived next door and stuff, and from that point I thought maybe he was just an awkward guy. But he spoke to me a couple more times and didn't really seem shy or anything. In fact, the next time that I saw him, he was just standing out in the hallway, not really seeming to be going anywhere. When I left my place, he approached me and asked me if I wanted to come over to his place. I said that I was busy and I had to go somewhere, and I declined. After this, Arthur tried to ask me out a couple of times when he saw me in the hallway, but I said no each time. He struck me as a little bit odd and creepy. All of these interactions with him happened within the first month that he lived there. It was starting to get annoying, because it seemed like almost half the time that I left my place, he would leave after me or be in the hallway. Then, one night, I was in my apartment and went to take out my trash. We did not have a trash chute on my floor, and we had to walk all the way down to the basement to take it out. So I got on my flip-flops and left my place and walked down to the basement. I was gone for maybe 2 or 3 minutes at most. Then I returned to my apartment and went back inside of it. It was kind of late at this point, and I was tired, so I decided to get ready for bed. I wasn't necessarily planning to go to sleep right away, but probably just watch some shows in bed. So I started to go around and turn all the lights off in my place. When I passed by my broom closet, I was sure that I heard a noise inside of it. This was very weird. I didn't know what it could be. The last thing that I was expecting was for a person to be in there. But when I opened the door, I saw Arthur standing right inside. I jumped back and started running for my bedroom. Arthur emerged from the broom closet and then actually started going after me. After I got inside my bedroom, I slammed the door shut, but I didn't have enough time to lock it. Arthur was there within seconds, and I saw him starting to open the door. I had the half bathroom attached to my bedroom, and I ran for that door. I got inside and shut the door behind me just after Arthur had gotten inside of my bedroom. This door had a slightly different lock, and I was just able to lock it on time before Arthur reached. He then tried opening the door and then started banging on it. Fortunately, I had my cell phone in my pocket. I dialed 911 as fast as I could. Neither Arthur or me said anything in this time. After trying to open the bathroom door multiple times, Arthur then started banging on it. I finally spoke and yelled that I had called the police. Then I talked to the 911 operator. I told her exactly what was going on. In this time, Arthur finally walked away from the bathroom door. However, I couldn't tell if he had left my apartment or was just in the other room, so I stayed hidden in the bathroom. It felt like forever that I was waiting until the police showed up. In that time, I didn't hear anything, and when they got there, I finally came out of the bathroom, but Arthur was not in my apartment anywhere. I told the police where he lived, which was obviously right next door, but Arthur had left. Eventually, though, the police were able to locate him. Apparently, he had gotten into similar trouble in the past and had a bit of a history. I obviously didn't lock my door when I went to take out the trash that night. Arthur must have just walked right in and hid in my closet. I'm glad that I found him when I did, even though that made for one of the scariest moments of my life.
23 years old and recently graduated from college. I have a job, but I'm still living with my parents until I get a little more money saved up. In the meantime, I've been living in my bedroom in the basement. It's pretty nice, and I pretty much have my own space down there and have the whole basement. The basement is finished and has my bedroom along with the spare in the hallway. There's also a bathroom down there, and then a large living room area with a TV and such near the stairs to the upper level of the house. One day I had gotten home from work at about 9 p.m. and went down to my room to just relax and watch some Netflix. My parents were gone, so I was alone in the house. I got some food from upstairs and then went down and started a show. I would guess maybe 30 minutes later, I suddenly heard the sound of glass breaking coming from upstairs. I paused my show and listened closely. Could it have been my parents? I listened for their voices, but I didn't hear anything. Then I started to get a horrible feeling. I froze and started to hear footsteps walking around from upstairs. I then heard a voice, but it wasn't the voice of any of my parents. It was a younger sounding man's voice, and then another man's voice. I couldn't make out anything that they were saying, but I could just barely hear the sounds of their voices. At that point, I knew someone had broken into our home. I got out my phone and called the police as quietly as I could, reporting a break-in. I told them to hurry, and they told me they would have the next available police come to our house. Then all I could do was wait. I heard them moving around upstairs, and I was afraid to make a sound. I sat there on my bed hoping they wouldn't come downstairs, and it sounded like they weren't going to. But then about a minute later, I heard the noise of someone walking down the stairs. Each step that they went down, I panicked more and more. When they had reached the bottom, I realized the possible danger that I was in, and I quietly went to my closet and hid inside of it. I closed the door as quietly as I possibly could. Being in there made it harder for me to hear where the men were, but if I listened really closely, I could sort of tell. I heard them walking around, and eventually they made their way to the hallway. My heart started racing at probably about the fastest rate it ever has. I heard footsteps get to the end of the hall where my bedroom was. Then I heard the door open. I closed my eyes and held my breath. But shortly after it opened, I heard footsteps walking back away. I continued to hear them walk around downstairs for a bit. Then I finally started to hear police sirens. The men then went back upstairs, and I stopped hearing them completely. The police arrived a few minutes later, and I finally left my bedroom. As I got out, the police told me they were in pursuit of the vehicle that the man had been in, and later that day they ended up being caught. They had broken in through an upstairs window and stolen several valuable items we had in our house. I guess they didn't see anything worth taking in my room, because they seemed to just open the door and then walk away. My parents were shocked when they got home, but they were overall just glad that I was all right.
This is something that happened when I was 11 years old. It was a warm summer day, and I was outside of our house in the front yard. I don't remember the exact time, but I would guess maybe 6 or 7 p.m. I remember that there was this kid named Mikey who lived on my street. Our neighborhood was very large. There were many streets, and each of them had a bunch of houses. So there were a few kids that I was friends with who lived nearby. I remember that I saw Mikey walking down the street, and when he saw me, he waved. Then he approached me in the front of our yard. I remember that Mikey then told me that there was an ice cream truck in the neighborhood. Obviously, on such a hot day, I wanted to go and find it. So Mikey told me to follow him, and he said that it was just one street over. Mikey told me that his friend who lived on that street told him about it. So I remember that we set out and started walking to the end of our street to then go to the next one over. Well, when we got to that street, the ice cream truck was no longer there. We figured that it was just driving around, and Mikey's friend was on the street and told us that he thought it went to the next street over. We realized that the truck would probably still be close by, so we decided to go there. I remember that we went to the next street over from that, but things weren't as simple as they sound. The neighborhood streets were not all the same. Some were a little curved or slanted. Some were also longer than others, and there were occasionally small parks and things like that. So we ended up getting confused pretty easily. After not seeing the ice cream truck on the next street over, we thought that it still might be close by and kind of wandered around a couple of streets. I'd never really been over there before, and I kind of thought that Mikey knew where we were going, but apparently not, because after walking for like 10 minutes, Mikey said that we were lost, and there was no ice cream truck in sight. So I said that we should probably head back, and Mikey agreed. However, we did not know what direction was the right way. Naturally, we tried to just go back the way that we had come from, but then we made a wrong turn somewhere. We were probably just walking farther in the wrong direction, and neither of us had cell phones or anything like that. So after walking for what felt like a really long time, we were still not quite sure as to where we were, and we never even found the ice cream truck. Then, after coming around the corner to this one street, I noticed a kid in the front yard of one of the houses. I didn't recognize him, but Mikey did. When we saw him, Mikey shouted hi to the kid, and the kid started waving us over. We went into the front yard, and Mikey started talking to this kid. I don't remember what about, but I was not really a part of the conversation. I was a pretty shy kid back then, and they were not including me on the conversation. It was as if I wasn't even there. Then, all of a sudden, the kid invited Mikey inside, and they started walking away from me. I was 90% sure that I wasn't invited to go into the house, but I didn't know what to do, so I kind of started to follow them. Then Mikey turned to me and said, "See you later, man," and that made it clear to me that I couldn't go in. They walked into the kid's garage, and then they went into his house through another door. I stood there in the driveway. What I should have done is yelled to him, "Wait, so you're just going to leave me here? You know that I don't know how to get home." I should have at least gone to the house and asked the kid's parents to call my parents, but that just didn't come to my mind. I was a shy 11-year-old kid. Instead, I walked out of the driveway and back onto this random street. By now, the sun was actually starting to set. I was mad at Mikey and angrily walked down the street for a while, but I still had no idea as to where I was. As I kept walking down random streets hoping to see something familiar, it slowly got darker and darker outside. I wasn't really seeing anybody else outside at all. As I walked down one street in particular, though, I came around a corner and this one guy stepped out from behind a parked car. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt. After I sort of passed him by, I noticed him start to walk after me. He was kind of a long ways back, but I did notice he walked to the end of the street when I did. When I got to the next one over, he was still there. The distance between us was at least 50 feet. I kept walking to the end of the next street, and the man was still there. But then I saw something that was finally familiar to me. It was a busier street that was connected to the one that I lived off of. I would just have to follow that to my street. When I got there, I started to walk along the sidewalk. I noticed that the man was still there, and he was the same distance back, and he was now walking down the sidewalk too. I did feel a little better here though, because occasionally a car would pass by on the road. I finally realized where I was, and I knew that my street was coming up on the left. Finally, I saw it. As soon as I reached my street, I just started sprinting. I ran as fast as I could, and I didn't bother to see if the guy walking behind me would chase after me or anything. I was able to get to my house, and then I ran inside. It felt amazing to finally be back home. After that, I was really mad at Mikey. I didn't talk to him for weeks. We were never really that close of friends, but that was a terrible thing that he did. I'm happy that I was able to find my way back home that night.
This is the story of my first roommate in college. I was a freshman at a decent-sized university in Ohio. I got a random roommate for my first semester in the dorms. He immediately seemed a little odd to me, just kind of the way he talked and acted in general. Nothing that crazy, but he just stuck out to me as a little strange. Still, I tried to make the most of it and would talk to him here and there. I was able to make friends rather quickly at school, and within about a month, I sort of had a group of guys that I would hang out with regularly. My roommate, on the other hand, never really seemed to leave the room other than to go to class. I would sometimes offer him to hang out with the guys, but he would always turn it down. Whenever I would leave the dorm, though, he would always ask me where I was going and how long I was going to be gone for. I found that sort of annoying because it's not like he was my older brother or something, but if I was going to be out late, I always made sure to tell him. One day, when I happened to be at the dorm and my roommate was away at class, I was drinking a bottle of water, and when I was done with it, I threw it across the length of the room to try to make it in my garbage can. I missed, though, and it bounced away to my roommate's side of the room and kind of went under his bed. I went to go grab it, and as I was picking it up, something caught my eye. It was a storage box that was slightly open and underneath another box, but I could see some photos in it. I admit that my curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to open the box. I had to move the box on top of it to get to it, but I opened it very carefully. I thought initially that it was maybe family photos of my roommate, but when I started looking through them, I became really weirded out. There was many photos of random students walking around on campus. All of the photos were candid, and many looked like they had been taken from our dorm room, which had a nice view of the campus. There were probably over 100 photos, and some had multiple of the same person. They all appeared to be taken at a far distance, and the camera was zoomed in. Then I found a photo of myself when I was walking to class one day. I decided to put all the photos back as I had found them. I closed the box and got back to my side of the room. My roommate came home later that day and went on his computer. After several minutes, he asked me if I had been going through his stuff. I admitted that my bottle had rolled under his bed and I moved his box a little, but I didn't tell him about seeing his box of photos. He said okay, but seemed to be a little upset. That night, I decided to hang out with my friends like I often did, and told my roommate that I'd be back by 11. It happened to be a Friday night, and my friends and I stayed out a little bit late, and I lost track of time a little. I went to one of my friends' houses after, and saw that I had a text from my roommate asking me why I wasn't back yet. It was 11:10. I texted my roommate saying I was on my way back, and he replied that he had a surprise for me. My roommate was not normally one to make jokes, and something about that text just rubbed me the wrong way. I went back to the dorm, and when I did, I got to my room and opened it to see my roommate immediately come charging at me. I closed the door quickly and ran out. He didn't chase me and stayed in the room. I was legitimately worried, so I decided to call the campus safety, and they showed up a few minutes later. I went away from the room and went back to my friend's house. I was later told that my roommate was found hiding behind the door and tried to attack the campus safety officer. Police were brought in, and he was arrested. I got to live in the dorm by myself for the rest of the year.
This story happened many years ago when I was a kid. If I had to guess, I'd say I was maybe 12 years old. My family lived in a pretty average house in a big neighborhood. We had one level and then a basement. I was always kind of scared of the basement because I was a kid and it would usually be dark down there. Overall, it just seemed scary to me. We didn't really use the basement much for anything other than storage though. We did have a little setup of an old couch and a couple of chairs with a TV though, but it was only used occasionally. One night when my parents were gone, it was just my older brother and me at home. I had to go down to the basement to get something, and as I opened the door to the dark basement, I was immediately a little bit scared. I ignored the feeling though, and turned on the light and then walked downstairs. I went down there and noticed that something looked different. As I got closer, I saw that all the furniture that was set up in the basement had been rearranged. It was as if someone had moved everything to the other side of the room. It wasn't really messed up, but just rearranged. I was startled and ran back upstairs. I asked my brother if he had rearranged things in the basement, and he shook his head and told me no. I told him to come downstairs and look with me, so we both went downstairs and saw how everything was rearranged differently. My brother told me that he had just been down there the day before, and it wasn't like that. We both agreed how it was really strange, but knew our parents must have done it. When they got back home later that night, we asked them, but to our surprise, they said they hadn't moved anything at all. We all went back downstairs once again. When we did, everything was back to normal. All the furniture and everything was just how it had been before. My dad went around and looked everywhere and said everything seemed to be perfectly in place. Nothing else like that ever happened, and my family only lived there one more year before moving. Still to this day, though, I always wondered what exactly happened down there. This is something that happened to me a few years ago. When I tell the story, most people still don't believe me, and I wouldn't have believed it myself if I wasn't there. It all started when I was traveling about halfway across the country to visit some of my family back home. I lived a few states away, and I liked driving back home instead of flying because it was always a fun drive through a beautiful part of the country. Anyways, I would usually have to stay 1 to 2 nights in a hotel depending on how long I drove. This time I was planning to stay 2 nights. Some of my friends had been using Airbnb a lot when they traveled, so for this time I decided to give it a try. I found this cool little house that was very affordable for me and looked to be almost in the woods. It had the feeling of a cabin, and when I got there I could see how isolated it really was. I arrived a little bit early, but it was still dark out, probably like 8 or 9 p.m. I got inside to see that it was a really nice place, but it also appeared to be pretty old. I basically just had some food and then got ready for bed. But the whole time I thought I could hear some noises coming from somewhere inside the house. I knew I was supposed to be the only person there, so I got a little bit concerned. It sounded very faint, but was almost like a tapping or a knocking. I figured it was something from outside, but once I got upstairs, I could hear it a lot better. It definitely sounded like someone was in the attic making noises. I thought it was probably a squirrel or maybe a mouse because of how this house was out in the wildlife. I did my best to ignore it. It would stop occasionally and then start up again. It would stop occasionally and then start up again. Sometimes it would be louder or faster, and then would slow back down or stop completely. I knew I was just staying there one night, so I got into bed and tried to fall asleep. The noises kept going though, and I found it difficult to relax. Then I thought I could just barely hear the sound of someone talking. I decided that for my own peace of mind, I would go up into the attic and take a look around to see what the noises was so I could finally relax and get some rest. I walked over to the hallway and found the latch for the attic. I opened it up, and with a chair I stood on it to see inside. As I was opening the latch, I could hear the noises starting up again. I looked inside, and what I saw next shocked me. About 10 feet away, there appeared to be a really short man tap dancing. He was wearing a suit and a tie, and had a huge smile on his face. He then turned and looked at me, and as he did, he backed away and then seemed to just disappear. I think I went into shock for a few moments, but once my brain was finally able to compute what I had just witnessed, I immediately ran back downstairs, packed all of my stuff as quick as possible, and then left. I drove to a motel about 10 miles down the road and stayed there. Since it happened, I sometimes think I had to be dreaming or something, but I know that I wasn't. I've also never hallucinated or anything like that. It's something that will always puzzle me, but I know it sure creeps me out a lot.
This story takes place a few years ago when I was in high school. I was about 15 at the time and was home with my older brother who was a senior in high school. It was a rainy night and our parents were both gone. We were sort of bored and had always been a little curious about the deep web, so we decided to go on it and give it a try. My brother said he knew how to access it, and we used an old computer in the basement because we were afraid of potentially getting hacked or something. Still, we were very curious, so after my brother was able to get into the deep web, we searched around some random stuff before finding a chat room. We talked a little bit in the chat room to some people, and before long, we were sent a link by a user with no context. I warned my brother not to click the link, but he did anyways. As soon as it was clicked, the computer locked up. Then the screen went all black. It caused the whole room to go pitch black, as we had all the lights off in the basement and could only hear rain falling from outside. We thought the link had crashed the computer and maybe even broke it. I figured it was some sort of prank by the user. My brother tried pressing several keys and even moving the mouse around, but nothing happened. We decided to leave the basement and went back upstairs, thinking we had broken the old computer. We discussed what to do for a couple minutes and then went back downstairs. But when we entered the room that the computer was in, we froze. The computer screen had what appeared to be a man in a really creepy clown mask with a black background. He was just staring into the screen and smiling. We thought it was some sort of creepy video, until the clown pointed at my brother. My brother moved farther away, and the clown continued to point at him as my brother went across the room. This caused my heart to start pounding. The clown then turned and pointed at me, and then waved his finger for me to come closer to the screen. My brother then quickly ran up and covered the webcam that we had on our computer. Then he yelled at me to turn off the computer. I ran up and pressed the power button, but the clown stayed on the screen. Nothing was happening. I then went to the wall and unplugged the whole power strip from the wall outlet, and the computer finally turned off. We both had to take a minute or two to catch our breath. We left the old computer in the basement unplugged for a few days, but afterwards it seemed to work just fine.
I live alone in a house. I've only lived here for a couple of years, and I would describe the neighborhood as quiet. There are a lot of other houses around, and most of the neighbors are very nice. Well, last year, I had hardly ever seen my next-door neighbor to the west. Only once or twice did I ever notice her. As far as I knew, there was just one woman who lived there. Her yard was right next to mine, so I would have been able to see if she ever went outside, but I never did. It was a little bit mysterious, but not something that seemed that crazy. Well, one night I was home and it was pretty late. Before bed, I was getting my things ready for the next day. I realized that I couldn't find my wallet. After looking around for a few minutes, I thought that maybe I forgot it in my car. Sometimes it would fall out of my pocket. My car was parked in the driveway, so I left my house and walked outside. It was very dark and quiet. I went out to my car and opened up the driver's door, and sure enough, my wallet was sitting there on the seat. So I picked it up and then started to head back inside. But as I did, I noticed that my next-door neighbor was outside. She was standing in her yard, not that far away, and kind of looking at me. It seemed kind of weird to be out this late, and I didn't really know what she was doing. I just turned and walked back up my driveway to the house. Then I went back inside. As I got back into the kitchen, I put my wallet back on the counter where I usually kept it. Then I was going to head into the other room. Except that's when I noticed out the window that my neighbor was now in my yard. She had seemingly walked over and was now right next to the driveway. I was wondering what exactly she was doing over here. Then I watched as she walked right up to my window. She then went right up next to it and started looking inside of my house. It was really strange. She didn't wave at me or anything, but appeared to be looking in my direction. Then she moved down really quick. I didn't know what to make of it, so I left the room. But a few minutes later, I went back into the kitchen to see if she had in fact left, but she didn't. She was now standing at another window and looking in. I didn't know if she could see me or not. I wasn't that close to the window, and when I noticed her, I sort of moved back and around the corner. I watched her, and she was just staring into the window. She kept looking in for like 5 minutes straight. Then, finally, she moved away. After that, I went over to the window and I watched her going back into her yard and then back inside of her house. I was so confused by this whole situation. After that, I just went to bed though. I didn't really know what to do. And I didn't see my neighbor for months after that. Since then, I've only seen her a couple of times. I've never brought up what happened. I still don't know what she was doing.
My wife and I live somewhat out in the country. It's not super out there, but we have a decent-sized yard with the woods on our property, and we don't have too many houses on our street. One night, my wife had gone to bed already, and I was staying up late watching a sports game on TV in the living room. When the game was over, I turned off the TV and then turned off the lights in the living room. As the lights went out, that gave me a clear image of our front yard, and something caught my eye as it did. I noticed there was someone dressed as a clown, complete with a mask and everything, just standing in the front yard staring directly at me. It was extremely unusual in my neighborhood to see anybody walking down the street, and we had a fairly long driveway, so I was shocked at the sight of a clown in the front yard. He didn't take his eyes off me, and I walked over to the front door. The closer I got, the creepier the clown looked, and I opened the front door just slightly and stuck my head out. He was pretty far away, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I had planned to yell at the clown and ask him who he was and what he wanted, but shortly after I opened the front door, I saw the clown run away and disappear off into the woods. Now this was also concerning, as those were our woods, but I hoped he would just run off and that would be that. I stayed up a little while longer, even went all around the house making sure every window and door was locked before finally deciding I would head to bed. I fell asleep rather quickly, but was woken up sometime in the night by my wife. She said to me, "Do you hear that?" I listened closely, but heard nothing. She then told me that she woke up to what sounded like someone knocking on the front door. Just then, there was more knocking. It was like a really fast and constant knock. Not a very hard knock, but just very constant and rather fast. This time, the knock continued for a good 15 seconds straight before stopping. I figured it had to be the clown. I told my wife about seeing the clown in the yard, and she suggested calling the police. I slowly got out of bed as the knocking started up again. This time the knocking did not stop and just continued at the same fast pace that it had been at before. It was seeming like it was slowly getting louder and louder. I slowly walked towards the living room and tried my best to remain out of sight the entire time of the clown. Once I got there, I could barely see that it was in fact the clown that had returned to the window of the front door. As he continued to knock, I started to hear laughing from the clown, a really creepy laugh. At that point, I yelled in a loud and firm voice that I had already called the police and they were on their way. Of course, I hadn't actually called the police yet, but I wanted to see if I could scare him off. It seemed to work, because I didn't hear any more knocking after that, and he seemed to walk away. I don't know why that clown went to our house, or how he even found us.
In December of 2020, I applied for a new apartment, deciding to move from my old one. The apartment that I applied for initially was leased to someone else before I could take my deposit in. I ended up getting the last apartment the management company had available. It was the same everything: design, price, owner, and area, but the difference was that the apartment numbers were different. I didn't apply for this particular apartment, so I didn't see it before signing the lease, but I did see the other one I applied for before being assigned this one. I walked into a complete mess of an apartment. The tub was rusted, the O-ring on the toilet was broken, causing a horrible odor to fill the apartment. The dryer connection was also clogged, so this caused the dryer to not even dry clothes. It also seemed like there was something growing through the hallway door, like a tree or something. This caused a hump in the floor. I complained daily to the management company and was in the midst of hiring an attorney, but after a month of complaints and calls to the management, in January of 2020, the management company offered me to change units. I agreed to move into the second unit, as it was up to my standard and in far better condition than Unit 2. I hired movers, set my deliveries to be delivered to the new unit, and my 18-year-old daughter and I started moving our few things I had from our old unit to the new one. The very first day after we spent the first night in the new unit, my daughter walked out to my car looking for something as we were preparing to leave for the day. I heard what sounded like rattling noises. I thought it was my daughter outside rattling the windows, trying to get my attention out of fear or an injury, so I began to walk to the front door. But then I realized the noise was coming from above my head. I stopped outside of my bedroom doorway and looked up, and the entry door to the attic was above my head, and it opened very wide. It was so wide that I looked straight up at the trusses in the roof, but I could not see who it was up there, so I yelled, "I don't know who you are, but I'm about to blow your brains out." Then I went and grabbed my gun off the dresser, and then the attic door slammed shut. The noise proceeded to go back the way it came, from the neighbor's side of the duplex. My daughter came back inside the house and saw me pacing with my gun in my hand and knew it was serious after taking one look at me. She asked me what was wrong, and I told her the story, so she urged me to call the police. I called 911 going along with her suggestion, and the sheriff came out and they stuck a mirror inside the attic. However, nothing was found in the attic, and they revealed that they had received a call exactly like that before, but in another unit.
I knew it was my old unit I had just moved from because it had the latches on the attic door. The sheriff went to the neighbor's house and asked him, and he denied even being home at the time. I found that strange because it wasn't even 3 minutes later. Although I couldn't see who it was, I truly believe it was my neighbor. I'm just grateful that whoever it was decided to try it at the old unit and not the one we were at while we were asleep. I did not move, although I know I had the perfect grounds to break the lease and be done with this company and these apartments. But I had just spent over $2,800 with moving. I was exhausted at the thought of moving again. However, I had someone put in the same type of latches that the other unit had on the attic's door entry, and I called a security alarm company for an alarm system. I had a motion detector installed in the attic, and I also had a sensor put in the attic so that I'm notified if it's opened.
This is something that happened back when I was a kid. I was about 8 or 9, and back then I used to play out in the street with my friends. During the summertime, most of the neighborhood kids would all hang out. I remember that we would all have to go inside by sunset typically. So one evening, I was on my street, a ways down from my house. I was hanging out with about 3 or 4 other kids who lived nearby. I don't remember exactly what we were doing, but I know that the sun was starting to set. After a little while, 2 of the other kids had to go, and I was thinking that I should probably go back soon as well. However, I did not immediately go inside. Instead, it was me and these other 2 kids who were still in the street talking. We were a ways down from my house, and normally the street would be really quiet and not very many cars would drive down it. I remember though, that right when it was really starting to get dark out, we saw this truck enter the street from the other end. We moved over to the side of the road and noticed that the truck was going very slow. Soon, we saw that it was an ice cream truck. It was also playing the typical ice cream truck music, except it was very quiet. The volume must have been turned almost all the way down. So as the truck approached, I personally had mixed feelings. I was always happy to see an ice cream truck in the summer, but something felt odd about it driving at basically nighttime with the volume so low. The 3 of us kids remained on the side of the street, and we were going to let the truck pass. I realized that most likely the truck wasn't going to sell ice cream at this hour. Except when the truck got close to us, it started to slow down even more. Then it stopped. The 3 of us just continued to stand there, now staring at this ice cream truck in the road. The truck just sat there running for what felt like a long time. I was really curious about this situation. Then, finally, the driver's door slid open. A man stepped out and said hi to us. We said hi back to him. The man then asked us if we wanted some ice cream. He said that it was the end of the day and he had some leftover that we could have for free. This sounded good and I was quick to say yes, but then the man told us to go ahead and get inside of his truck. He moved back and was going to open the back door, and that's when I had a sort of bad feeling about it. There was just a bit of suspicion that I probably shouldn't be going inside of the truck. The other 2 kids started to walk over, and I didn't know what to do, so I just started following them. I was telling myself that nothing bad would happen, but I remembered that as we made it around to the back, and this guy was standing there just inside of the truck, I heard my sister's voice. I looked over, and my house was probably like 100 feet down the street. My older sister was yelling at me to come inside, because I wasn't supposed to be out past dark. When I saw her, she was standing at the edge of our yard. Then she seemed to notice the ice cream truck and stuff. My sister would have been about 15 at the time, so a lot older and more mature than me. She asked what was going on and started to walk closer. That's when the ice cream man suddenly closed the back door to the truck. The other kids that I was with took off running in the other direction to go back to their houses. It all happened so fast. My sister then started yelling at me to get away from the truck. All 3 of us kids then ran away. Meanwhile, within seconds it seemed, the ice cream truck quickly started driving off. I got back to our house, and my friends went back to theirs. I then went inside, and my sister told my parents about what happened. They didn't let me leave the front yard without supervision for a few weeks after that, but I learned my lesson. After that, though, I was always suspicious when I saw an ice cream truck.
I was a little younger. I had just gotten my own place for the first time. and I went on the deep web for the first time as well. I had heard about it for a long time when I was a kid, and I guess my curiosity eventually got the better of me. When I went on, I searched for games because I wanted to know the kind of games that were on the deep web. I've always been a bit of a gamer. I explored many different websites, just kind of browsing around. They had a lot of pretty normal types of games, and then a few weird ones as well. Over the next week or so, I explored the deep web and played around with a few games. Then one day, I came across this really weird looking game that was sent to me in one of the gaming forums I went on. I clicked on the game, and I saw that the graphics were sort of crude and looked like the 3D graphics from an early 90s video game. I decided to play the game, and when it started, I was a character in a house. I walked around the house for a little bit, and realized that the house in the game looked exactly like my house in real life. Obviously, the graphics weren't the best, but it was blowing my mind how accurate it was. Things from tables and chairs to where my TV and couch were was completely accurate. I was getting really creeped out the more I walked around the house in the game, and I didn't know how this was possible for anyone to know all this information. Then out of nowhere in the game, I saw another user come in. It was someone wearing all black and a ski mask, and they were in my house. I started to run away from them in the game, and then it started to glitch out really bad. The game ended up freezing up and then crashing about a minute later. The experience was enough for me to want to be done with the deep web. I ended up deleting the browser I had used to go on it after that. A couple of days later, though, I woke up in the middle of the night to a notification on my phone. It was my doorbell security camera detecting activity at the front door. I nervously clicked on it to see what it could be, hoping for nothing. But when I clicked it, I saw a man dressed in all black and a ski mask walking up to the front door. He just stood there for a little while and looked into the camera. He then waved slowly and turned around and walked away. I kept watching, but he didn't return. I stayed up the rest of the night, and since that incident I haven't had any interest in going back on the deep web.
I worked as an overnight grocery stalker manager for 19 years. This happened about 15 years ago, and I'll never forget it. It was a regular night shift, and we had no incoming deliveries, so it was just the crew and I backstocking. Occasionally, someone from the meat department would stay late after hours and do a deep cleaning of their area about once a week. It was just after midnight when Mary, who worked in the meat department, came up to me. She was visibly shaken, in tears, and almost out of breath. She told me that there was a man standing in the meat department dressed in all black, motioning for her to come to him. She said she was scared and didn't know what to do. I told her to stay calm and grabbed another employee to check things out. We looked through the whole store, checking every aisle, the meat department, the back rooms. We checked everywhere, but there was no one. I reassured Mary that we had checked and there was nobody else in the store. It felt strange, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just tired, or maybe she had imagined it. But to be honest, I still felt uneasy. Our closing manager always did the final walkthrough to make sure that everyone was out, and it was just us workers. After that, Mary went back to finish her work. I tried to get back to mine, but only a few minutes later, she came back up to me again, this time in full panic mode. She said that the man was back, standing in the meat department, motioning for her again. I told her to stay with me, and I grabbed the other employee once more. We looked around again. Nothing. No man or strange figure, just the empty store. At that point, I told Mary that she didn't have to finish her cleaning and she could go home for the night. I wasn't going to push her to work if she was that shaken up. She seemed relieved and left. The next morning, when the store manager came in, I told her what had happened. She didn't seem too concerned. She just pulled up the camera footage from the night before to see if anything strange had been caught on tape, but there was nothing. No sign of anyone standing in the meat department. Nobody in the store who shouldn't have been there. It was all business as usual on the cameras. The manager seemed to brush it off and said that it was probably just stress or exhaustion getting to Mary. The manager did mention that Mary had told her a strange story a few nights before about a customer in the store who had a knife. She hadn't said much else about it, but the manager figured Mary had just been stressed out and needed some time off work. The next night I came to work, someone told me that Mary had passed away. She had gone home after work the night I sent her home, went to bed, and never woke up. A cause of death was never identified. Mary was only 40 years old and was a healthy person. I've worked plenty of overnights since, but that was the weirdest thing that ever happened on my shift. It still gets to me sometimes, even though it happened decades ago now. This happened last summer. I was driving home from work one night. I often work all kinds of different hours, and on this night in particular, had worked very late. I left at probably about 2:30 in the morning, and the drive back home usually took about 20 minutes. So by this time of night, the roads were very quiet. After getting off of the highway about 5 minutes into the drive, I didn't see any other cars for a while. But I remember that I came around a turn, and a very short time later, I saw these headlights behind me. I could tell that it was a larger vehicle, like maybe a truck, but I didn't think too much of it. So I kept driving down the road, and eventually I had to turn. I remember that when I made this turn, the vehicle behind me did as well. But not only did it turn with me, but right after the turn, it increased its speed. Now the vehicle was much closer to me than before. We were the only two vehicles out on the road at this time. As it got closer, I started to hear like a kind of music. I remember that after a couple of minutes, I rolled down my window slightly. That's when I realized that this truck behind me was an ice cream truck, and it was playing the ice cream truck music. This seemed really strange. Why would an ice cream truck be out driving at almost 3 o'clock in the morning and playing the music? I kept going, with the truck driving right behind me. Eventually, I had to turn again. When I did, the truck behind me turned as well. After going around the turn, I was able to see that it was in fact an ice cream truck. The closer that I got to my house, the more confused I was. But the truck ended up following me all the way to my street. Then I went down my street and I pulled into the driveway. The truck did not pull in after me, but instead it kept going a little bit farther. Then it stopped, basically in the middle of the street, sort of in front of my house. I quickly got out of my car and then went inside. After I got in the house, I looked out of the window. The ice cream truck was still there, sitting in the middle of the road. I could sort of hear the music playing, just barely. I watched the truck stay there for about 5 minutes. I was literally about to call the police on it, because it was very suspicious. But then it just started driving away. I was so glad to see it gone now. I thought that was the end of it. However, it wasn't. The next night, I did not have to work nearly so late. I wasn't followed home or anything, and I was able to be in bed by midnight. However, I remember after laying down and closing my eyes, before I could fall asleep, I heard this sound. It was coming from outside, and I could just barely hear it. Then I realized that it was the music from the ice cream truck. I went over to my window and looked outside. There, I saw the same ice cream truck, very slowly driving down the street. It was probably traveling at about 5 miles per hour or less. I couldn't believe it. This guy came back to my street. I watched the truck very slowly drive away and go out of sight. It took me a while to fall asleep after that, but the truck didn't return. After that, I never saw or heard it again. Looking back, it's still very confusing to me. I mean, why was there an ice cream truck driving around on the quiet roads at 3 a.m. anyways? And why did it follow me to my house? Then it came back to my street the very next night. I still don't have answers, but I'm just glad that I never saw it again after that. Over the winter a few years ago, I went to the grocery store on a weeknight with my 2 kids, who were 14 and 15 years old, and one of their friends as well. It was a routine shopping trip on a weeknight at 7 p.m. As we were going through the store, I took notice of a young man. He was very well dressed in a designer coat, nice boots, done up from head to toe. He looked like he was in his mid to late 20s or so, good hair, just overall a good looking person. He stood out to me because he just seemed too overdressed. As we proceeded through the store, I caught that the guy wasn't really with anyone and seemed to be in every aisle that I was in. He didn't have a cart and was on his phone a lot, and he kept picking up random items and pretending to look at the labels as if he was interested. He would pick up random items from a shelf, kind of pretend to seem like he was interested, and then put them back as my family and I would leave an aisle. He would follow us to the next aisle and do the same thing. This continued throughout the whole store. My family and I made our way to the checkout, bagged our groceries, and I gave a look around before we left to load the car. While loading the car, I saw the guy again. He looked at me and kind of made eye contact. Now, for context, my 15-year-old son is 6'2", 200 pounds, and his buddy who was with us was almost as tall. I'm a thin woman, 5'10", and my 14-year-old daughter is on the thinner side. I told the kids to get in the car, gave them my purse, and told them to lock the doors. They did as I said, while I still had to return the shopping cart to the corral they're kept in. The guy was near the car parked in front of me now, so I stepped out in his path with the shopping cart, and I made it known that I saw him making direct eye contact with him. I work in corrections, so I have a defensive stance, and I'm ready to go for whatever, and I wanted to let this man know that by my body language. The guy was about 5 feet from me, and he picked up on the fact that I was aware of whatever was about to happen. He quickly turned around, did some kind of hand signal, and bolted. At this point, a big black SUV came down the next aisle of the parking lot with completely tinted windows. The man jumped in, and the car sped off, wheels screeching as they left. I don't know what they had planned, but it was clear that I was a target from the beginning. A rather bold move considering I was not alone. I did contact the police department for that city, and I made a report. They told me I was not the first person to contact them in recent weeks with the same situation. They put extra patrols out in the shopping center for a few weeks. I don't get scared easily, but that incident still shakes me.
This story took place when I was in college. I went to a school in a different state from where I lived, but through a website, I was able to find a roommate beforehand that would be a good match for me. Her name was Annie, and she happened to have the same major as me. We were both females who loved animals, and we even talked about trying to maybe sneak a cat into our dorm. We got along great online, but when we first moved in together, she seemed a bit different. She just wasn't quite as nice, but overall that wasn't a huge deal. Over time, things got a little bit better though, and I enjoyed having her as a roommate. One night on a weekend, about a month into the school year, Annie told me she was invited to a party and wanted me to come with. Of course I told her I would, and that night we went together. We walked because it was only about 6 blocks away, but when we got to the house, it didn't seem like a party was going on. I guess that was a good thing, because then the cops wouldn't get called. But when Annie opened the door and went inside with me, there really was nothing going on. It was a typical old house that looked kind of run down inside. I asked Annie where everyone was. She told me the party was in the basement and said for me to go ahead, but she had to call her mom real quick. I walked down into the basement, where there were stairs that went down rather steep and then went around in another direction. I could hear music playing, but when I went around the corner, I saw just a mostly dark basement with a man in it about 10 feet away. I immediately turned back and ran up the stairs. The man started to chase after me. When I got up to the top of the stairs, the door was closed. I opened it and shut it behind me, then ran out of the house. Annie ran with me when she saw me running away. We both ran all the way back to the dorm. I explained to her what happened, and then she explained to me that she had the wrong address. I wanted to call the police, but we realized that we couldn't because we were in the wrong house, and technically somebody chasing someone out of their own house isn't really a crime. But as time went by, I started to realize how things just didn't add up. I began to suspect Annie had set me up. 2 days after the incident, though, Annie told me she was moving away to a new room because she just needed to be by herself. She packed up all her stuff and then left. I never did see her on campus again. To this day, I think that she set me up. The way the door was closed when I ran back up the stairs, and how she had told me to go into the basement, and then how she changed rooms right after. I could be wrong, but I have my suspicions.
This happened back when I was a kid. I don't remember every detail that well, but I will tell you what I can. I believe I was 10 years old at this time. I lived with my parents and 2 siblings in a pretty average-sized house. In our neighborhood, there were lots of other houses. I would often go out into the front or backyard and hang out with my siblings. So one time, I know that I was in the front yard, but I was by myself. I was playing with this dodgeball that we had, and I was kicking it around. I kicked it one of the times, and I guess it went a little far and ended up going out into the street. Now, the street that we lived in was usually pretty quiet, and there were not regularly cars driving down. My parents still always told me not to leave our yard, but I had to go to get the ball, so I started to run after it as I saw it rolling down the street. When I got out into the street, I was still a long ways from the ball. That's when I noticed a man standing on the side of the road near the sidewalk. He was a few houses down from mine, and he walked over and picked up the ball. There were a few cars parked on the side of the road as well. The man was standing like maybe he had gotten out of one. I went a little bit closer, and when the guy noticed me, he waved. I remember that I thought he would toss the ball back to me. I waved at him and held my hands out for the ball, but instead, he waved me over to him. Then, I walked the rest of the way towards the guy, and when I got to him, he asked me if it was my ball, and I said yes. The guy then unlocked the car parked near the side of the road that was by us. He then tried to get me to go inside of it. I don't remember exactly what he said, but I think he might have told me that he'd give the ball back if I went with him. I just know that while holding onto the ball, he got into the driver's seat and then opened up the back door. I knew better than to get inside of this guy's car though. I was still really confused. I wasn't really sure who this guy was and why he was here in the first place. After sitting in the driver's seat of the car and opening the back door, he then tossed the ball into the back seat. He motioned for me to go in, but instead, I just turned and ran back towards our house. I knew this guy was trouble. He did not chase after me, and when I got back into the front yard, I finally stopped. I watched this guy drive away in the opposite direction, not going by our house. Then I went inside. I found my mom and told her about it. She went outside, but the guy was gone. She ended up calling the police about it. Unfortunately, I couldn't give very good details. I didn't know the license plate or even exactly what kind of car it was. And to this day, I don't remember any details like that. The man got away with stealing my ball, but more importantly, he wasn't able to kidnap me. However, I remember a couple of years later, I think it was, when I was maybe 12 or 13, I was going on a walk through my neighborhood, and I happened to be one street over from mine. I rarely went to this street when I was a kid, but I know that when I was walking down the street, I happened to pass by this one house, and I saw this guy that was outside in the yard. When I saw him, I remembered the guy from a couple of years ago. I wasn't 100% sure, but I think it was the same guy. I never said anything or did anything because I really wasn't 100%, and I didn't want to accuse the guy, but I still think to this day that that was the same person.
A year ago, my wife and I were having a fire in our backyard with a few friends. It was something that we occasionally did on weekends or whenever, really. When it got to be sort of late and our friends left, we put out the fire and went inside for the night. I was pretty exhausted, so I fell asleep really quickly. However, I was woken up in the night by something. I didn't know exactly what it was that woke me up, so I sat up and looked around. Everything seemed to be just fine, and I didn't hear anything, so I decided to go back to bed. But as soon as I lay down, I heard the noise of something falling coming from the living room. This made me sit up in bed and be completely silent. I heard my wife wake up, and she asked me what that noise was. I told her it was probably nothing and I would go check it out, but I was actually pretty concerned because we didn't really have anything that would just fall over randomly. I slowly walked to the bedroom door and opened it. As soon as I opened the door, I was looking directly at a man who was in our house. He was wearing an orange ski mask, and I slammed the door shut as soon as I saw him. He had probably been just about 10 feet away. I ran over to the phone and called the police. Things got really quiet in the rest of the house, so I thought the man had run away, and I told the police that I thought they had ran off. But after I was done talking to the police on the phone, I heard another noise in my house. This creeped me out pretty badly. I hoped whoever it was would not come in the bedroom. My wife and I stayed in the room, armed with whatever heavy objects we could get our hands on. It was some pretty tense moments waiting for the police to arrive, hoping that the door to the bedroom wouldn't open. I knew the man was still in the house because we had heard movements, but thankfully they weren't coming from near our bedroom. Finally, the police arrived, and I saw flashing lights coming down the street. The police made entrance to the house and eventually got to the bedroom. I assumed they had caught the man, but then they asked me where I thought he went. I told them I had heard noises from the living room, and they ended up searching the entire house, but the man was never found. It turns out I had left the back door open from the fire we had had, and the man just walked right in. I suppose that's the same way he left too, but it just scares me that he was never caught. It's also a little strange that he didn't appear to take anything either. A couple of years ago, I worked at a GameStop during my summers home from college. The GameStop I worked at was located across the street from a Target and next to a pizza place. It was overall a good experience for me. That is until one night. It was a Thursday night and I was working with one other person. Things were pretty typical. At I think about 7 p.m. or so, a man walked in with a console in his hand. He was wearing a dirty old jacket, and to be quite honest, he looked homeless. He approached me at the counter and placed down an old GameCube. The system was absolutely filthy with dirt on it, and it looked like it probably didn't work. We also didn't buy or sell GameCube anymore because they were too old and we hadn't carried them in years. The man said he'd like to sell it to us and wanted to know what he could get. I could smell the heavy smell of cigarettes as he spoke. I told him we were sorry, but we couldn't take it because we don't buy GameCubes. The man's face started to get angry. He tried to persuade me to buy it, but I told him it couldn't be done. The man then started to raise his voice and basically just complain about GameStop for a while. There were maybe 2 or 3 other people in the store at the time, and they all started to look at the angry man. Finally, he cursed at us and stormed out of the store. I was really happy to see him leave. People would sometimes come in with items that we didn't buy, but none of them were as crazy as this situation. I worked the rest of my shift, and when closing time came, me and my coworker went to our cars and left. I got into my old Chevy Malibu I was driving at the time, and before I drove home, I looked on my phone to catch up on the text that had come in as I was working. Just then, in my side mirror, I saw a man emerge from the bush behind where I was parked. It was the same man that tried to sell me his GameCube. He was walking towards my driver's door at a fast pace. I barely had time to react before he reached the window. I quickly reached for the door lock and locked the door. He tried the handle immediately, but it was locked. I had just gotten it on time. I heard him shouting at me, and I decided I need to drive away as fast as I could. But in the next second, he swung his hand at my window, and I could see what appeared to be a rock in the man's hand. It hit the window, and the glass shattered everywhere. I could feel sharp pieces hitting me all over. I slammed my foot on the gas and drove out of there. It was the biggest adrenaline rush I had ever gotten, but it wasn't very enjoyable for me at all. I sped away and all the way home. Then I told my parents what had happened, and we called the police. The man was able to be located and caught, and my window was able to be replaced with insurance. However, that was my last summer working at GameStop. This happened when I was 18. My grandmother was going out of town for a couple of days and asked if I would watch her place and take care of her plants while she was gone. She had a large plant collection, and I was probably into plants almost as much as her, which is likely why she asked me. I had been to her place many times before. It was about 5 miles away from my house, but a little closer in the city. It was a very small house, with pretty much just a bedroom, living room, bathroom, and kitchen. The first day, I got there and took care of all the plants that she had. After that, I didn't really do a whole lot for the rest of the day. That night, though, as I was laying in bed and about to fall asleep, I just happened to look out the bedroom window. In the bedroom, the window was right there on top of the bed, basically, and you could see right outside. I saw a man walk right past me on the other side of the window, literally within a foot of my head. It really freaked me out, and I sat up in bed and looked out the window. Whoever this guy was, he didn't really seem to notice me at all and kept on walking towards the front of the house. I watched him, and he stopped in front of the living room window about 15 feet away from me. I ducked down, but he didn't even look in my direction. I couldn't tell much about the man because of how dark it was, other than that he was wearing a hood and had a backpack with him. I watched him reach into the backpack and then strike the living room window with something, and I heard glass breaking at that point. All I could think to do was get under the bed and hide. I crawled under and covered the side of the bed with a blanket. I heard the man walk around inside and go towards the kitchen. Once he was inside the house for about a minute, I knew hiding under the bed wasn't the best place, and I had the strong urge to leave, so without hesitating, I got out from under the bed and tried to open the bedroom window. I opened it very slowly and carefully, trying not to make a sound. I could hear the man still seemed to be in the kitchen at this point. I knew I'd have about 15 seconds if he decided to walk this way, so I started to hurry up. Finally, I was able to get it open, and I climbed out the window, and once I was outside, ran to my car that was parked in the driveway. I got inside as fast as I could and drove all the way back home. It wasn't until then when I told my parents everything, and then they called the police. I feel really dumb that I didn't call the police sooner, because when they arrived at the house, the man was completely gone. He had stolen a few things, but I don't believe he was ever caught.
It was around 1 a.m. one night when I decided to go to the grocery store. I had just gotten off of a late night shift of work and wanted to go shopping now, since I knew I wouldn't feel like it later in the day after I woke up. The store I went to was open 24 hours, so I didn't think twice about heading out that late. Everything was normal at first. I was doing my usual thing, picking up the items I needed and trying to get in and out quickly. But after about 30 minutes of shopping, I started to feel like somebody was watching me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but it wasn't long before I noticed a guy who seemed to keep showing up in the same aisle that I was in. At first, it could have just been a coincidence, but after a while, it started to feel less like a coincidence and more like he was following me. I told myself to calm down and kept shopping. I didn't want to make a big deal out of something that could be nothing. When I finally made it to the checkout, I realized that I had left my wallet in the car. I was so annoyed with myself. I had to leave my basket at the counter and run back to my car to grab it. Since it was so late and the store wasn't busy, the cashier was nice enough to hold my stuff for me. When I got outside, I saw the same guy again. This time, he was standing right next to my car, looking down like he was searching for something on the ground. My heart started racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I called my cousin as I walked towards my car, telling her about the weird guy who kept following me. She was talking to me on the phone while I was walking, just to keep me calm. When I got close to my car, the guy finally spoke to me. He asked if I needed help with something, but I just shook my head and said no. Then, almost immediately, he asked me for directions. I wasn't interested in talking to him at all, so I told him to ask someone else. Right when I was about to get in the car, I saw another guy come from the other side of the parking lot. He looked at me and asked again, "Are you sure you don't need any help?" Something was definitely off about all this. I don't know what came over me, but I just screamed as loud as I could. I yelled, "No, get away from me." I kept shouting, "Get away from me," over and over, very loudly, and I think I took them by surprise. I don't think they were expecting that, and they sprinted off together in unison, confirming that they were together. Before I could react any further, the security guard from the store appeared. He must have heard me yelling and came running over. He chased after the two men who had took off running. He didn't catch them, and since there were two of them, I don't think there was much the security guard could have done, but he did come back holding a bag that they had dropped. The bag was filled with some small knives and some tape. They were clearly looking to either rob me or worse. I still can't believe how close I came to being in a bad situation. If I hadn't been paying attention, or if I hadn't screamed for help, things could have turned out very differently. It was a scary experience, but I'm so glad I trusted my instincts and didn't stay quiet. That day I learned that in a bad situation, just loudly yelling can disorient and can cause panic among people with bad intentions.
A few years ago, when I was in high school, I used to get home and play video games almost every day. I mainly played video games in the basement, where we had a pretty big TV and I wouldn't bother my parents who liked to watch TV upstairs when they got home from work. Our house was a split level, and our basement wasn't really below the ground. Well, I guess half of it kind of was in the front, but in the back of the house we had a sliding glass door that opened up to the backyard. One day when I got home from school, I immediately went to the basement to play video games like always. Right away, I noticed that the sliding glass door was open just a little bit. I could feel the cool air blowing inside. I went over and shut it and immediately wondered who had left the door open, because I knew that I hadn't. Then I went to the couch and started gaming. I played video games until my parents got home and called me up for dinner. I ate with them and then did homework in my room and then went to bed. I had forgotten all about the door being left open downstairs and didn't even mention it to my parents. The next day, though, when I got home from school, the door in the basement was open once again, but this time it was much wider. I also noticed that quite a few things in the basement appeared to be messed up. I got a bad feeling and ran upstairs and called my parents. They told me to call the police, so I did and then waited for them to arrive. When they got there, they searched the entire house and property, but nobody was found. It seemed there had been someone in our basement, but they had left that morning. I was glad they were gone, but it was really creepy to realize that whoever was in our basement was likely in our house with us all night.
I own a house and I live by myself in it. I've not lived there for really that long, maybe 6 months. This is something that happened just a few weeks ago now. So for some background, I've always considered the neighborhood to be very average. It's not like a wealthy area, but it's also not known to be a bad neighborhood. Most of the people that I've met have been really nice. Of course, I didn't meet all my neighbors, but just a few. In the entire 6 months or so that I've lived in my house, everything has been fine, except for one night. A couple of weeks ago, like I mentioned, something really strange happened. I was in my living room sitting on my couch late one night. I think it was about 11 p.m. All of a sudden, my doorbell rang like 3 or 4 times in a row. It was really surprising. I didn't know why somebody would be at my house this late. I got up from the couch and walked over to the door. When I got there, I looked out of the window and nobody was there. I even opened up the door and went out onto the front step. I looked around but didn't see anybody. So then I went back inside of my house. But just a minute later, there was a knock on the front door. It was very loud, and I went over to the door again. But once more, whoever had knocked was gone. At this point, I figured that it was probably some neighborhood kids ding-dong ditching me. I thought they probably wouldn't come back. I waited around by the front door for a little while anyways, though. After a few minutes, nobody came back, so I finally returned to the living room. Maybe 10 minutes after this, there was a loud banging on the front door again. This time, I heard them knocking on a front window as well. I ran from the living room as fast as I could to get over to the front door. When I arrived, the people had stopped, but I was just able to see them running away. I saw what appeared to be 3 grown men running from the end of my driveway and into the street. I had figured it to be teenagers, but these guys looked a little older. Still, it was probably just a harmless prank. But the fact that one of them was banging on the front window next to the door this time was a little bit weird. After 10 minutes went by with nothing, I returned to the other room again. Some more time went by, and I actually thought that they were gone for good now. By this time, it was getting really late. But then they came back yet again, and this time was the worst by far. I first heard a really loud knock at the front door. I started running over there again, and as I was doing so, I suddenly heard the sound of glass breaking. When I arrived near the front door, I saw that the window in my front door had been broken. There was glass on the ground, and this made me so angry that I ran over to the door and went outside. I saw the same 3 men running away into the street. I ran through my front yard and into the street after them. They were pretty far ahead of me, but I saw them go into a house that was almost at the end of the street. After they all went inside, I kept going down the street until I got to the house. My plan was to confront them. This was not a silly joke anymore, but now a crime. Their house was probably the worst looking one on the entire street. I walked up to the front door and knocked on it, but nobody responded. I continued to knock on their door, and I wasn't going to go away. After I was knocking for a few minutes, I heard somebody yell from inside for me to leave. I yelled back that they broke my window. There was a few minutes of nothing. But then, I heard somebody coming from behind the house. There was a person out in the yard. I couldn't see much because they had no porch light there or anything. Moments after hearing whoever it was get to the side of the house, I looked over and then I heard something whiz past my head and hit a bush. Somebody threw a rock at me. Then another one nearly hit me and instead hit the side of the house. I turned around and started running away. When I was sprinting off the property, I heard at least 2 people laughing, which made me really mad. Still, I couldn't stay there. I got back to my house and was not chased or anything. Once I was there, I called the police. They came out a short time later, and after showing them my window and telling them what had happened, they went over to the neighbors. Apparently, about 5 adults lived in that house, and most of them were drug addicts. They had multiple illegal drugs inside of the house, so when the cops showed up at the front door, they panicked and one guy tried running away. The police ended up going inside and finding the drugs, and multiple people were arrested. I also pressed charges against them for both throwing rocks at me and breaking my window. Shortly after that, the house was sold to new owners who turned the place around. I've worked at the same grocery store for years now, and I'm used to the early morning shifts. I'm the first person there most days, opening the store up and getting everything ready before the rest of the staff arrives. It's usually quiet with no customers, just me and the sound of the freezer doors opening and closing as I prep the aisles. It was a little after 4:30 a.m. when I arrived one morning. The parking lot was empty as usual, and I let myself into the back through the employee door. The first thing I did was disarm the alarm and get the lights on. I made my way to the office to start up the computer system and check the stock list for the day. But as I walked past the office hallway, I noticed something off. The door to the back offices was open, and normally it was supposed to be closed by the closing manager the night before. I guess last night's manager must have forgotten. I went in to shut it, but when I pushed the door fully open, I froze. There, standing in the dark of one of the offices, was a man. He wasn't dressed in any store uniform or anything that even remotely looked like it belonged there. He had a hoodie on, but the hood was down. He was standing in the corner of the office going through stuff on a desk, looking for something. He didn't seem to notice me at first, but when he heard me, he turned around. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide, like he was just as surprised to see me as I was to see him. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but it came out shaky. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a few slow steps back, his gaze darting around wildly like he was calculating something. The man didn't say anything right away, so I talked again. I said as authoritatively as I could, "You need to leave, this is private property." The man just stared at me now, so I turned to walk away to get my cell phone and call for help. I grabbed my phone from the table I had left it on, but as soon as I grabbed it, I heard footsteps behind me. The guy was approaching me now, and I saw a knife in his hand under the dim fluorescent lights. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice getting more hostile now, "and neither are you." I turned and ran immediately. I ran past the aisles towards the front of the store, hoping he wouldn't catch me. I could hear him chasing me, the sound of his boots behind me. I grabbed my phone from my pocket as I ran and dialed 911, not stopping to speak to the dispatcher at first. I just kept running, pushing myself faster, trying to put more distance between me and him. I finally managed to get my breath and told the dispatcher that someone had broken into the grocery store and was threatening me with a knife. I gave them the address and begged them to hurry. I didn't go near the front doors or the exit. If I tried to leave, I would have to unlock the doors, and I was worried that might take too long and he'd catch me. I turned to the storage area, hiding behind some shelves, my back pressed to the cold metal. I could still hear him moving around the aisles, calling out to me in a low, almost sing-song voice. It was like he was playing some sick game and said, come out, wherever you are," he said, laughing softly. I heard the sirens in the distance, but they didn't seem to bother this guy. He kept walking between the aisles looking for me. I could tell that he was very tired from running earlier, and I heard his labored breathing. So I knew that if he found where I was hiding, I could probably outrun him again. When the police officers entered the store, the man shifted his attention towards the front where they were. The man didn't seem to understand what was happening at first, or maybe he didn't care. He turned towards the police and raised the knife in the air like he was ready to fight. The officers were able to disarm him safely without anyone getting hurt. We later found out that the man had recently been released from a psych ward and must have had a relapse of sorts. He actually used to work at our grocery store many years ago before I had started working at the store, so that was probably part of why he was at the store. He must have found a hiding spot before closing time the night before and stayed in the grocery store overnight. I feel bad for the guy because that morning in the grocery store wasn't normally how he acted probably, but regardless, it was a very scary start to my morning shift. When I was a kid, we lived a little bit out in the country. I was 12 at the time of this story, and would often be out in the front yard or driveway. Our yard was big, and the driveway was long. I was always playing basketball or something like that. So one afternoon, I was towards the end of the driveway where our hoop was, and I was practicing. Now, out of nowhere, I remember hearing this music playing in the distance. I didn't even know what it was at first. Then I looked and saw this ice cream truck coming from around the corner. And this truck looked really old and beat up. It wasn't one of the really nice ones, but one that you would immediately think looked suspicious or creepy. When I saw it, I turned and started running away. To that point, I don't think that I had ever seen an ice cream truck come down our street in my entire life. That's how far out in the country we were. Any car coming down the street would make me suspicious. I knew as I was running away that it was likely nothing bad, but for some reason I just felt the need to run. So it took me a little while to get up our long driveway, and by the time I got back in front of the house, I stopped to watch the truck. I expected to see it pass by our house, and I was curious why an ice cream truck was even on our street. Except, I noticed that when the truck got in front of our driveway, it just stopped. Now, at this point, I was standing near this large tree, about 10 feet away from our house, and I was watching. I then moved behind the tree and continued to watch. The ice cream truck had stopped right in front of our driveway, blocking it entirely. I was confused as to why it had stopped and who was driving it. I waited there and kept watching. About 2 or 3 minutes went by. I felt like I was in a standoff with the truck. The driver had to have seen me running up the driveway as it approached. Then, finally, I saw the truck start to back up. I felt relieved for a second and thought that it was leaving, but I was still a little bit confused as to why it was backing up and not just driving forward. That's when the truck started to turn, and after it did, the truck went forward and started entering our driveway. When I saw the truck coming up the driveway, I ran for the house. I got inside as fast as I could and then locked the door behind me. I ran around trying to find my parents. When I finally did, I told them what was happening. We went to a front window and looked out, but by then, the truck was completely gone. I didn't know what happened to it, but I guessed that the guy finally drove away. After that, I never saw the ice cream truck again. In fact, after that occurred, I don't think that I ever saw any kind of ice cream truck on our street. So that's the only time I'm aware of an ice cream truck of any kind ever coming down our street, and it was one of the most strangest and suspicious things that I've ever seen as well. It still creeps me out when I think about it to this day. I don't know who was driving that truck or why they even went down our street. Why would they stop in front of the driveway and then start driving into it? It was very strange.
This story happened years ago when I was a kid. I think I was about 10 years old or so. I remember that my parents took me to this really big park that was sort of near our house. We lived kind of by the city, so the parks were always really crowded. It was a weekend, so the park was especially busy. I think there was some kind of event going on, because there was people everywhere. I remember noticing a clown almost immediately, and the clown waving at me. I was kind of creeped out by clowns, so I sort of waved and then walked away. Me and my parents walked towards another area of the park, where there was a bunch of stuff going on, such as games, and even a live band in one area. We played a few games and walked around. There was some food and things like that. It was overall a fun time, and eventually we left to go to the grocery store. After we were done shopping, we were walking back to our car when I noticed there was a van parked a few spaces away from us. And just for a second, I looked over and thought I saw the clown in the driver's seat duck down. It was a little odd to see a clown driving a van. But like I said before, I wasn't much of a fan of clowns, so I just put it out of my head, and me and my parents went home. Later that night at home after dinner, I went outside to play around with my basketball hoop in the driveway like I often did. But when I got outside, I saw a van across the street parked on the side of the road, and once again the clown was driving. He ducked down again when I saw him, but this time he raised his head back up slowly and smiled at me. Then he began to wave. I ran back inside the house as fast as I could and told my parents, but by the time they made it outside, we all saw the van driving away down the street. He never did come back after that, thankfully, but I get creeped out thinking back on that every time.
I worked at the same grocery store for 5 years. Over the years, I noticed strange things happen in the store, leading me to believe that it's haunted. It all started one night about a month into my job. I was near the back of the store, the aisle with canned goods, when I heard a noise. It sounded like footsteps behind me. At first, I figured it was another employee, but when I turned around, no one was there. Numerous times since then, and I've heard footsteps behind me when in reality nobody has been there. It always happens in the same aisle also. There was one night, though, that still sticks with me. It was just the store manager and I in the store that night. It was close to closing time, around 11:30, and I was in the dairy aisle. I heard a door creak open. I assumed it was the manager checking on things, but when I looked up, the manager wasn't there. I walked to the front of the store to find my manager and just take a break from stalking, since these strange occurrences with footsteps had been happening often and were freaking me out. When I went back to the dairy section, I heard the creak again. This time, it was followed by the sound of a box sliding across the floor. I walked down the aisle, and there was nothing there. The worst part came a few months ago. It was just me and another worker, Sarah, on the night shift along with our manager. We were in the back stocking some produce when we both heard a moaning sound. It honestly sounded like sort of inappropriate moaning, and it was freaky. It was loud enough to make us both stop what we were doing. We both knew that it was another strange occurrence and there wasn't going to be anybody nearby, but we checked anyway. To our surprise, we turned a corner and saw our manager. We asked if he was making those noises, but he claimed he had heard it and was coming to check out what was going on. Anyway, throughout the next couple of months before I quit, there were other things that led me to believe it was haunted. Things such as carts rolling slowly into our aisle and other strange noises. I ended up quitting, partly because I was just ready for a new job, but also partly because I was sick of all the strange occurrences that would happen in the grocery store regularly. A couple of months later, I found out from my friend Sarah, who still worked there, that the manager who we worked with a lot had been fired. He had been caught as the reason for all the strange occurrences in the store. For years he had been behind all the supposed hauntings, and none of it was real. Personally, I think that the manager guy was very creepy, and doing this haunted grocery store trick not just once, but for years, shows how weird of a guy he was.
When I was a little kid, I used to love to go to GameStop. I would always beg my parents to take me there because video games were my favorite thing. Luckily for me, there was a mall nearby our house where my mom would always shop, and when she went to her stores, I would be inside GameStop playing the demo games and looking at stuff. One day, just like any other, my mom had to go shopping, and I told her I would be at GameStop. I went inside and saw that it was very busy. All of the demo games were being played, and people were crowded around everywhere. Looking back, I believe that it was a Saturday, and that's why the store was so busy. I went over to the PlayStation 2 section, which was the current gaming system at that time. I also had one. I started looking through the games when I got a tap on my shoulder. It was a man that worked at the GameStop. He asked me if I needed any help with anything. I told him no, I was just looking at the PS2 games. The man told me there was a new video game store in the mall where the games were cheaper, and he asked me if I wanted to see it. I told him sure, and the man told me to follow him, and we exited the store. We walked into the hallway of the mall and then walked for a couple of minutes. Then I noticed my mom walking out of a store about 20 feet away. As soon as I saw her, though, the man quickly turned around and walked to the opposite direction. I turned to follow him, but he was already so far away that I decided to go to my mom instead. When I got to her, she asked me what I was doing and why I left GameStop. I told her that the man was going to take me to another video game store in the mall, but my mom looked at me and told me there was no other video game stores in this mall. That's when I got a really creepy feeling that the man was possibly trying to abduct me. We went back to GameStop, and as it turns out, the man didn't even work there. My mom didn't let me leave her sight after that. But the creepiest part of that to me is the fact that the man seemed to know who my mom was before I waved at her or anything, as if he had been watching me earlier and knew I was away from her when I was at GameStop. This happened a few years ago. My friend Jeremy had just moved into a new house that he was going to be temporarily living in for a few months. It wasn't all that far from me, which I was excited about, but he told me just after about a week of living there that he couldn't take it anymore and he wanted to move out. He said the house was really creeping him out and weird things kept happening. I wasn't really buying it, and he told me I should just stay in the house for myself. I agreed, so we decided to swap places for a few days. I was really skeptical of whatever Jeremy was afraid of and figured he just had mice or something like that. I got to his house and saw that it was pretty old looking and not in the greatest of shape. Jeremy showed me around a little bit and then left. I found it funny at the time how afraid he seemed to be of the house. After he left, I was confident that nothing would scare me. I hung out for a bit and nothing strange happened at all. It wasn't until nighttime when I was headed upstairs when I heard what sounded like a large crash of things coming from the basement. It was extremely loud, so I headed downstairs to the basement to take a look. I got down there and flicked on the light and didn't see anything out of place. There wasn't really anything down there at all, just a few boxes, but they hadn't fallen over. Still, I figured there was an explanation and I went back upstairs, but I couldn't help but be a little bit creeped out. It was pretty late at that point, and I got ready for bed and was just about to fall asleep when I heard the distinct sound of scratching coming from the bedroom window. I opened my eyes and looked over to the window. The scratching stopped and I saw nothing. I went over to the window and looked outside of it. It was on the second floor of the house, so I don't know who would be able to reach it from up there, and there were no tree branches or anything scraping it. At this point, I was officially spooked. I really didn't think anything strange was going to happen when I got there, but now I saw why Jeremy was so creeped out by this place. I immediately left and got in my car and drove all the way back to my place and slept on the couch for the night. Jeremy ended up staying at my place for a few days until he was able to get in line with another house and move out. I don't know what was up with that place.